The sky above you is a low, leaden bowl, pressed close to the land as if to keep the cold from escaping. A fine, crystalline dust settles on the brim of your coat and on the hair above your collar. It catches the pale light and makes the world narrow and small. It is late 1936, and winter has gathered itself early and without apology. The breath of the town hangs like smoke. The radio cabinet in the corner of the grocer's has a hush around it as people listen for news of thaw or storm. If this journey moves you, please like and subscribe and stay with the whole walk. You will find warmth in the end. You step out, and the first thing you notice is how sound is swallowed, as if the air itself were a wool blanket. Your boots make no splash, only a dry, crisp squeak against packed snow. You follow the street toward the river, the lamps haloed in ice, and the town presents itself in small, persistent details. A dog chained to a stoop, paws tucked under its belly. A line of mittens pinned over a post to air and stiffen. A milkman's cart, its wheels rimmed in white, abandoned where the alley narrows. The windows of the feed store glow a steady orange beige, and you see the outline of men lifting sacks by the light of a kerosene lamp. The smell of coal and stew drifts out and settles on your face like a second skin. You are not a celebrity of maps and flags. You are an observer who moves through other people's lives, sometimes staying, sometimes taking the wind with you. Today, you are the one who goes toward the outskirts, following where the sound of the river thins and the houses spread further apart. You have heard of the weather station beyond the tree line. Small, squat, a box of wood and glass that takes the worst the season offers. People call the men who work there explorers of a kind, not the romantic sort who plant banners on unknown peaks, but explorers of silence and measurement, of lonely nights spent listening to the world and keeping time for those who live downstream. Beyond the last stoop, the landscape opens into a raw field. Birch and spruce are frosted in filigree, their twigs etched in white. The wind is a patient critic, cutting through the collars of coats, tipping up the edges of a newspaper trapped against a fence post. You drift forward, and before you is a low building with a cone of smoke from its stovepipe. A flagpole shows no flag, only the steady coat of snow. At the door, a narrow plank has been laid to keep feet from sinking. Someone has salted it with ashes. A bell tied to the latch jingles once as you push the door open, more as an announcement than a sound of welcome. Inside, the air is two kinds, the warmer, peppery heat from a coal stove and the cleaner, colder air pushed through from outside by boots and breath. Men and women lean over maps and thermometers, hands red but capable. A young operator at the radio table rubs a mitten against her sleeve, and the static is like a white sea behind her words. She speaks not to you, but into a box of brass and wood, announcing observations into the thin electrical thread that links isolated outposts to cities that never see the ice. Pressure falling, she murmurs, and someone answers that the depot at Town Center will board windows at dusk. You sit by the stove for a while, letting the heat come through the leather of your gloves. The stove is a small cathedral in cast iron, soot dark, round, with a belly that radiates, a place where warmed bricks are tucked for boots or for aching backs. A boy, no older than 13, sits with his back to the fire, his face lit like a page. He is mending a glove with a needle and coarse thread. The thumb is a patchwork of leather and wool. Across from him, an old farmer hums a thin hymn under his breath and straightens a weathered map, the edges raveled from fingers. "Been a hard season," the farmer says without looking up. His voice is low and not seeking consolation, only stating a fact. He keeps a small tin of black tea at his elbow and pours with the deliberation of a man who measures everything twice. "How long you been out here?" you ask, because the map before him is of places you almost know. You learn people by the places they keep. "Long enough," he says. "Long enough to know when the snow will come for 2 days straight. Long enough to know when the river will change its voice." He points to a thin pencil line where the river curls, and for a moment you see how the river is both map and calendar, how men read its surface like the sky. Outside, a dog team arrives silently, sled runners whispering. Two men step from the curve of the road, hoods drawn and faces wind-burned. They are explorers in the sense the title grants them, cartographers of cold, men who have learned to walk between storms. One carries a leather satchel, the other hauls a case of brass instruments wrapped in oiled canvas. They speak in short sentences, where the ice is thin, where the road to the next cabin is drifted up. There is no bragging, only practical inventory, bread, oil, a length of rope. They are careful with their speech because in cold countries, words are like fuel. Too many can burn a room, too few can leave one in the dark. In the corner, an operator nods when the newcomers speak of a storm building over the ridge. It will arrive before morning, she says into her scribbled log. Her handwriting is quick and certain. You notice the tremor in her fingers and the way she warms them by cupping them near the wire spool. Out in the town, a church basement becomes, on certain nights, a patchwork of beds and quilts where families bring a crate of coal to share and offer the long bench to a neighbor who runs out. In an alley, a line of men passes bags of flour from one shoulder to the next. A neighbor pounds at the door of a house where an elderly woman sits alone. She opens the door a sliver and accepts a pail carried by 3 hands, gratitude held tightly against her chest without words. You drift to the coal yard in the afternoon where the river of people narrows into the river of work. Men with caps pulled low lift sacks and run them along a hand-cranked hoist. The coal smell is an honest thing here, full of heat and grit. It coats hair and skin and settles in your throat like a remembered hunger. The foreman, a barrel of a man with breath like steam, barks orders softly and then laughs at a small joke told by a youth who has frost on his eyelashes. The laughter is a snapped twig of sound in the hush of winter, and it is enough for a moment. From the depot, you hear the bell of a streetcar even though the cars are struggling to run on buried tracks. A conductor, cheeks red and eyes bright with purpose, moves between passengers with a lantern, his ticket punch a small metal rhythm. A woman compresses her shawl around a baby, and the baby's breath fogs and patterns the tight air. There are rumors on the line that the railroad will be delayed and that trains will be held on sidings until rails can be cleared, but those are distant concerns to a mother whose stove is running low. On a farmstead farther from town, you watch the mother at the stove. Her hands are skilled at economy. She reuses water warmed to soften dough. She places warmed bricks in the foot of a crib for a restless child. She improvises leggings from old quilted coats. We stitch the winter as we must, she tells you when you ask, fingers stopping for a moment to pat a kneaded lump. Her home smells of simmering bone broth, of dried herbs, of laundry hanging like pennants. Children tumble under a table, making forts from pillows, and the underside of a chair becomes a cave. They are not oblivious to the cold. They are expert at play within it, turning hardship into ritual. At the clinic, which is a single-room affair with windows banked against the wind, the nurse organizes a tray. The clinic sees more than a few frost-damaged toes and numb hands. She treats them with the clinical care of a woman who knows how to preserve function without drama. Warm slowly, she instructs, not with a scold, but with the precision of lengthened practice. A mother holds a blanket-wrapped child while the nurse checks the pulse, and you see the small unspoken exchanges, the nurse's steadying hand, the mother's quiet whistled breath. When a fever comes in, the clinic moves into a different tempo. Measured doses, careful logs, trays wiped clean more often. In those hours, time itself seems to be measured in spoonfuls of medicine. There is gossip, too. The old man who sits at the post office counter keeps stories like coins and gives them with the same small flourish. He remembers when the last big winter threatened and the river froze to the middle. He remembers how the town pooled coal like a potluck. People think winter is a thing that arrives and takes, he says, when you hand him a warm cup, his fingers folded over its rim. But it's the other way. We take it. We make of it a ceremony. His eyes are bright like pebbled glass. He speaks of the radio as a new hearth. When the voice of the city comes over the static, it becomes the thread that ties them to a larger world, Warnings, record temperatures, a hymn hummed in a distant hall. You drift from place to place, following the invisible current that is the wind and the sound of human breath. On the outskirts, there are men who travel for a living. Linemen who climb ropes to mend sagging telephone wires ice stiff. Mechanics who grease engines to coax them into motion despite the oil's reluctance. You watch them plan each movement with the care of chess players. One wrong step and a rig could be lost, or worse. A lineman jokes to the mechanic about the stubbornness of grease and cold, and both laugh like men who stitch the world back together one small fix at a time. Children find ways to make winter into a school of ingenuity. In the schoolhouse, the teacher stokes a small coal heater and teaches arithmetic by having pupils count the number of bread rations for a week. She teaches songs that are short and cropped, the words tucked so breath does not escape them before the note is made. Between lessons, they play with a sled fashioned from an old crate, its runners hammered from scavenged metal. They invent games that reward cleverness. Who can build the sturdiest snow wall? Who can fashion a sled with the smoothest runner? Their laughter rings like tiny bells. It is brittle against the sky, but true. As days gather, you hear a sharper record on the radio, a low baritone voice that describes a storm forming to the north, slower than a rumor, yet more definite than a hope. The operator trims her notes and looks up as the dial ticks. Outside the town's daily life, small expeditions, surveyors, trappers, a Navy weather unit prepare themselves. They are explorers in the older sense, people who go into silence and listen. They pack with a kind of economy that betrays deep experience. Wrapped boots, spare mittens, extra kerosene, a roll of canvas, a carved wooden box of emergency cocoa. Before leaving, they accept handshakes that are more like exchanges of trust. A woman at the depot kisses the cheek of a man in a parka. The kiss is brief and precise, a vow without flourish. The storm arrives in a slow, deliberate swell. What begins as a tightening of pressure becomes a deepening hiss at the windows. Snow starts at first as polite travelers, small crystals that land like confetti. Then, as the day closes, it thickens into a wall. You follow the men who decide to cross open fields to reach a cluster of outbuildings before drift traps paths. Their heads are down, their scarves wound, their boots making regular patient holes in a white sea. The radio operator sends a short message. Anyone caught in the open should seek the line of fence posts and keep to the lee. It is the sort of advice learned in lifetimes and repeated softly because it is true. As the wind comes, so does an economy of movement. People will do less but more precisely. A baker who normally rises before dawn now sees bread kneaded by the faint blue wash of lantern light. His hands work with the same motion but with a new cadence, as if each loaf is part of a barter between survival and habit. Neighbors check on each other with a knock traded through a muffled door. The church basement fills, quilts are unfolded, shared casseroles passed, stories thin into sleep. The blizzard is the heart of the night, and narrative rhythm tightens with it. Short sentences, faster breath, details sharpen to edges. Snow smacks against the windows like thrown coins. A truck trying to brave the main road digs its lights into the drift and slides, its engine protesting. A boy helping his father with the plow becomes a single movement between them, a passing of knowledge without speech. How to keep the blade from icing, how to coax a tired horse forward with crumbled oats. At the weather station, the men and women tie down spare equipment and tape seams, listening to the radio for updates, charting pressure changes with the meticulous obsession of people whose instruments are their confidants. In one house, the silence is almost sacred. An explorer, a young man who left a college town for this work, sits with a small journal and a pencil, writing the day's temperatures and then noting the way the light, even through the storm, slants differently on the 8th morning. He writes because the act of recording is a way to exist, to name the shifting world. He writes of silence, not as empty, but as a presence that has texture and tone. It is a peaceful silence, he tells a visiting sister over a cup of stew, like the space between heartbeats. She laughs, then coughs, and both of them pause as the wind drums a slow rhythm against the eaves. The sister is practical. She knows how to sew patches and how to read the sky for creaks that mean danger. And she steadies him when his thoughts begin to tilt toward homesickness. When medical distress comes, it is the town that opens like a net. A man with frost-damaged ears is brought in wrapped in quilts. A neighbor's child has a fever and is given a warm compress and a spoonful of syrup. The clinic moves with economy and tenderness. You see the nurse teaching a mother how to warm a hand slowly by using the body of another child as a heater. It is a small, ingenious thing and speaks of a knowledge older than the nurse's career. There are losses too, quiet, dignified departures that the community marks with a shut door and a bowl of porridge left on the table. The old man at the post office says their names as if the echo of them might somehow keep a presence near, and people nod and fold themselves into the small rituals that make grief something shared and less sharp. One night, the line of lanterns on the main street goes out all at once, the result of a breaker tripped by ice. For a minute, the town sits inside its own small hearts. Then, someone opens a window and sets a candle in it. Windows become an unspoken signal of solidarity. A neighbor sets out a chair and a kettle over a small brazier, and slowly the light returns, warm and private and communal at once. People gather at doors and talk in short bursts, about repaired fences, about a stray sled, about the neighbor's cow that has found shelter under a hayloft. The radio hums in the background with news of blocked roads and measures taken elsewhere. Someone jokes about how winter is ever the same and never the same, remembered and renewed. The climactic moment arrives in a way that is both dramatic and deeply ordinary. The worst of the storm finds a stretch of open plain, and a mail carrier caught on a lonely road seeks refuge in a barn. The mail carrier, a woman with a steady jaw, has been delivering letters for 30 miles of icy track. She shares her bundled parcels and the small tobacco box of sweet cake with a family of stoic farmers who have taken in one or two neighbors. The barn has hay stacked high. It is an island of warm breaths. In the corner, a dog settles and sighs in a way that makes you think of the contented groan of a kettle pushed to the boil. They share stories in low voices, letting the sound be a thing that keeps the night from becoming a crowding dark. In the storm's immediate wake, the communal labor begins. Shovels are passed from hand to hand, harnesses are checked, horses fed, sled runners oiled. It is a choreography of habit and instinct. A group of men and women organize a human chain to pass coal to a family high on a hill whose steps are caked with drift. A teacher organizes the children to gather kindling and to make snow bricks for the narrow path to the well. There is no heroics in the sense of single acts of glory. The heroism is small, spread thin and strong. People simply doing what must be done, day after day, gesture after gesture. The radio becomes a communal hearth. When the power returns, a hush gathers, while voices, some clear, some crackled, announce road openings, the movement of relief teams, the weather forecast that promises a slow mercy. You stand among people leaning close to the cabinet, their faces lit by its glow more than by the room's lights. They fold in what they hear like a soft cloth, useful instructions, warnings, and the occasional small kindness relayed from elsewhere. A driver who can spare a load of coal, an offer from a neighboring town for a doctor on call. Thaw comes not as a sudden smile, but as a cautious thawing of the world's edges. At first, there are only hints, the way ice cracks softly underfoot like distant applause, the long sighs of melting snow gutters, a faint smell of wet earth folded into damp wood smoke. The river draws its face again. Slush moves under the bridge with a slushy, impatient sound. Children run to the pond to test its surface, and then run back, cheeks raw and voices high. People unwrap winter quilts and shake them. For a while, the town is full of drying fabric and domestic sunlight. In the aftermath, you notice how certain objects have acquired a new significance. A chunk of warmed brick that served as a foot warmer is kept on a shelf like a small relic. The radio cabinet is polished and its knobs turned often, as if gratitude can be expressed in small ritual. The foreman at the coal yard keeps a list of everyone who contributed to the shared pile. Names are written in a ledger that is heavy and stained but precise. These are memorials in miniature, ways to record the ways people spoke care into each other. You return to the weather station at dusk on a day when the sky is thinning. The men and women there have the calm of those who have seen the world close and open again. They tape a photograph over a hook, old snowfields and the faces of people who are no longer present. The young operator leaves the radio table for a moment and looks out at the horizon, the line where land meets sky. She breathes deep, and the white of her breath is a small visible thing. We measure, she says to you simply, but we also remember how to give what we have. Her tone is without sentimentality, but full of recognition. Along the road home, you pass families hanging sheets to dry in the thin spring air, and children kicking at the last crusts of snow as if to test their mettle. The stoic farmer tends to a fence that had bowed and now must be straightened. He hums without words, and his hands move like a man who has practiced patience. Across the town, church bells peal a single, clean note that seems to gather and release the season. The old man at the post office nods as you pass and murmurs a line from a poem you do not know. It hangs in the air like a feather. By the time the light grows thin and the first real sap begins to rise, you have seen how the explorers, those who walked into white and stayed to keep watch, are not the loud kinds of heroes. Their bravery is quiet, a keeping of hours, a careful tending of instruments, a willingness to stand in the cold and listen until the weather yields its numbers. Their silence is not absence. It is the space where communities measured themselves and found one another. The thaw brings the smallest sounds back at first, dripping from eaves, the scuff of a boot over wet boards, the tentative chirp of a bird that has lingered in a sheltered grove. You stand by the river and watch the ice break in slow, tidy sheets that drift and fold. Light leaks differently now, warm and liquid, and the town exhales. People who have been living on rations of borrowed coal begin the work of mending. Quilts are patched, boots resoled, children given a new day. There is a soft humor to the repairs. Whoever mended a sleeve took a bold stitch, and laughter eases like wind through loose shingles. When you finally sit down by the same coal stove where you began, the room is familiar and changed at once. Faces you have watched through the season are a little softened by survival and a little shrewder. The radio plays a fiddle tune and someone taps the rhythm with a spoon. You sip a bowl of broth that tastes like concentrated seasons, bone, root, and the warmth of shared labor. The stove hums, the bricks at its base warm your feet, and you feel the community around you as a slow, steady warmth, not blazing but enduring. Outside, the snowbeds loosen and puddles gather in the ruts of the lane. A child leaves a small boat fashioned from a scraped tin and watches it sail along a gutter like an offered hope. The wind is kinder now, flirtatious rather than fierce. The explorers you have followed, surveyors, radio operators, mail carriers, and the men who tend the rails, pack away some of their gear, knowing the memory of winter will remain like a bruise that fades but does not vanish. They exchange small gifts, a tightened bootlace, a jar of preserved fruit, a note carved on a scrap of wood. In the peaceful silence that follows, the town does not forget the winter's lesson. There is a ledger of names. There are chairs by windows where people sit more often and look out over the thawing plain. The radio plays not only forecasts, but the occasional broadcast of music, which people lean toward as if hearing an old friend. You rise and walk to the edge of town once more. The light has thinned to a generous gray, and the first brave green rests in a sheltered ditch. A bird, perhaps a robin, hops and then flutters into invisible air. And you realize that endurance is not just the act of bearing the cold, but of standing through it together and letting warmth return as an earned gift. You close your coat and feel, for a moment, the echo of all the small actions you have watched. The passing of coal, the quiet mending of a glove, the careful notation in a journal, the patient turning of a radio dial. They are the measures of a community that learned to survive with dignity and to treat silence as something generous rather than empty. The explorers, in their modest way, taught others how to live with the elements, how to listen, how to share, how to keep a watchful silence that was filled with care. Walk back down the lane, and as you do, you carry with you the memory of the stove's heat, the radio's hum, and the quiet hands that layered warmth against the long season. The cold has not been vanquished, it never will be, but its authority has been negotiated. In the small rooms and large fields, people learned the architecture of endurance. The scaffold of mutual aid, the brick of routine, the mortar of shared humor. The silence that remains at the end of winter is no longer a void, but a space, seasoned by human presence, by the steady, peaceful persistence of those who braved the cold and kept one another warm. You follow the lane toward the stretch of tracks where the village's small siding narrows into an unswept shoulder of gravel and rust. The thaw has left the railbed a wobbly thing. Puddles gape between ties, and tufts of dead grass stand like tired sentries. Men and women who had once merely kept the way clear now find themselves with tools, bars and shovels, a borrowed jack, and the motion of repair is almost ceremonial, as if by aligning the iron they might align something inside themselves. Jonas, thick-shouldered and patient, lifts a tie while humming a low tune he learned from his father. When he sees you, he nods, not with news, but with the fact of his presence. One hand calloused, the other ready to steady a stranger. That steadiness seems to be the point of the morning. Near the station shed, Ansel crouches with his radio rig tipped toward the sky, fiddling with an antenna like a man tuning his own pulse to another's. The set crackles with signals, voices that are mostly static, a string of weather reports, a joke from a faraway ham operator. He straightens and folds the aerial away without fuss. And when you ask him about the schedule, he taps the ledger where he has written the times a train might appear. More hope than timetable. They'll keep the promise, he says. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. When the line opens, people come with things we need. When it closes, we keep what we can. He says it with the same plainness with which he has always noted the wind in his logbook. There is a heap of parcels and jars on the lean-to's bench, gifts and trade goods left by well-meaning relatives or swapped at a nearby market before the roads became impassable. Marta, the mail carrier, has set them out like offerings. A small cardboard box tied with twine, a tin of biscuits that smells faintly of molasses, a folded sweater the color of late autumn. She sets a hand on the ledger where names and debts are written. The ink is smudged where many have passed their fingers over the column of promises. She looks up when you approach, and there is an amount of relief folded into her expression that surprises you. Relief because to account is to remember, and to be remembered. A child runs between boots and shuttles, clutching the tin boat from the gutter earlier. She is already teaching herself the shape of patience and joy, how to wait, how to push, how to applaud a small craft that makes it past a puddle. An old woman, Margot, who keeps the church stove and whose hands seem never to have been idle, ties a scarf about the child's neck and gives you a look that acknowledges the passing of winters like pages turned in a well-thumbed book. When she speaks, it is to the child and to you at once. We plant the seeds we have, she says. We keep the ones who cannot plant. We remember those who left us stones and bread instead of names. The ledger comes up again in conversation. It is a battered thing with leaves like a map of small sorrows. During winter, it was a record of favors. Who took coal and promised to return 2 weeks hence, who borrowed a lantern, who kept a stray hound through a blizzard. Now the ledger acts as a plan. Entries translated into who will receive seed, who will tend the communal patch behind the meeting house, who will go to mend a roof. You stand with the others and listen to the reading aloud while the warmth of the conversation pushes steam from people's breath. There is a measure taken, a balancing, between the ledger's arithmetic and a more generous math, the one that counts how often someone has knocked on another's door. Arguments, when they arise, do not explode. They unspool in threads. Tomas, who maps the fields when the frost allows, worries for those who still hold debts to traders in the town 2 valleys over. If we give seeds away freely this spring, he says, we risk the chain. Those traders will expect repayment in grain come autumn, and we will have less to offer. Etta, with her son clinging to her skirts, replies with the quiet heat of a hand on a forehead. "We also risk families," she says. "There is a boy I know who will die if we do not help him plant. Are we a ledger of names or a life?" The elders, gentle people, their arguments braided with habits of listening, convene at the long table beneath the meeting house's narrow windows. They speak slowly, not because they need more time to form an opinion, but because their opinions are stitches that must be sewn with care. At last, one of them, an old surveyor named Abram with a scar along his jaw, looks up and says, "We will do both." He proposes that the village keep a reserve of seed for the most immediate needs and set aside a communal strip of earth for a shared sowing. "If we plant together," he explains, "when harvest comes there will be more to distribute, and no one will be forced to pay with what they cannot give." It is not a brilliant or novel solution. It is the economy of neighbors. So the community decides to plant. The strip behind the meeting house is chosen because it is flat and sheltered by the sunfall from the east. Children help turn the soil in measured clods, and their laughter is the sound of work lightened. Older men and women move with bowed grace, hoes and spades swinging like slow clocks. You take a shovel too, pressing the metal into the earth that still smells faintly of old coal and rots. The first seed placed in a palm is like a promise you make aloud and then must honor. Your fingers tremble slightly as you bed it down and cover it with the loose loam. Ansel brings his radio northmost in order to sharpen the moment with music, a fiddler's reel that runs like thin ribbon between the rows. It is small and human, and the slightest of triumphant things. That evening, after the last shovel has been set aside and the children have been shepherded home, there is a solemnity to the shared meal. The stew is watered down but generous, and people take second helpings without shame, because there is a reckoning that mercy is not measured in individual portions, but in the way the bowl is passed from hand to hand. A woman brings a jar of preserved plums, and the sweetness in them tastes of a winter that now hangs behind. The ledger lies on the table as it always has, but tonight someone pins a leaf to it, a sprig of green bound with string, as if to mark a shift. On the night before the train is expected, a thin mist rises from the low fields. You walk past the coal stove one more time. It gives heat like an old friend, who will continue to be there whether you linger or go. Voices float down the lane in low conversation. Plans for welcoming, a decision about where to put fences, names read aloud of those expecting strangers' goods. The explorer's quiet has a new accent now. It is not merely a practice of endurance, but an opening of hands. There is no naive expectation that everything will be easy. They have learned by the ledger and the loan and the lost bread. Still, they prepare as if for a return. Morning comes in a silver wash. The station bell, a small metal thing that had been hung for the winter to call volunteers to tend the stoves, rings twice, and people gather with their coats tight and faces like something carefully held. Children press to the windows of the station shed, breath fogging the glass, while the elders stand back to watch the younger hands. Names written in the ledger help shift crates and unpack tools. Marta carries a stack of letters with stiff fingers, each envelope a small exercise in hope. You stand among them and feel the town's attention fold outward toward the tracks, like a collective ear. Smoke appears on the horizon in a column not much wider than a man's forearm, then grows as the shape becomes a promise. The iron bird, if one can call a thing with flanges and wheels a bird, moves along the lane like a slow heartbeat. Its sound muffled and then clear, a low bray that seems to set the small town to balance. When it comes to a stop, the men who tend the rails step forward, hats lifted, as if greeting an old acquaintance. The engine hisses and a door opens. A young conductor, cheeks windburned and eager, steps down carrying a crate. He watches the faces around him in a way that looks like curiosity, not calculation. The first goods to come off are practical: bags of fertilizer in heavy burlap, a coil of wire, nails, a supply of sugar that sends a small ripple of joy. Then a parcel wrapped in brown paper appears, addressed in a neat hand to the ledger's keeper. For the village, MP. It is heavy, and when it is unwrapped, there is laughter and a little gasp, because inside are wooden counting beads like those used in school, a ledger book with blank white pages, and a stack of stamped postcards. There is also a jar of seeds from a town further south, labeled with names of beans that promise to climb poles and cling to things. Ansel plays the radio softly as if to underline the ordinary miracle. But among the goods is also a letter that is not simply the thin communication of orders and prices. It bears a name you did not expect to see, Jonas. The handwriting is uneven and older than someone's 20 years might make it. It is the hand of a man who has been away. Your heart performs a small, contained thud, the sort of thing that belongs only to a chest in a moment of recognition. You watch Jonas as he takes the letter. His fingers close around the envelope without shaking, and then he sits down on the wooden bench as if it will hold him. People move aside because there is a tacit understanding that a letter can be private. Jonas reads aloud after a silence, and his voice is like a river opening. He says, Jonas begins, I found work on the line, and my back has mended, and I will come home if the grass has time to grow. Tell them I sent what I could, that jar of seeds, the beads to count what we save. Tell them I am learning to listen. The letter speaks of bare rooms warmed by the slow correctness of a person's new routine, of rail yards and names of men who taught Jonas to fix a soldering iron, of small kindnesses in boarded-up stations. At the end, there is a line, blotted but undeniable. I owe you more than coin. I owe you a return. There is an anomalous hush at that, a particular hush that is not solemnness so much as the feeling of a thing coming round. Jonas's face is not changed by the letter in any spectacular way. The corner of his mouth may have thinned or the light in his eyes shifted. But the village understands it as a hinge. Winter took some things, yes, but it also carried some people away with a caution that would, in time, permit their return. The conductor of the train, sensing the moment, offers to make tea for those who will ride to the next stop, a small act that is received like a benediction. You accept only if it is not truly needed, and as you sip the bitter brew, your mind goes to the patch you planted behind the meeting house, and the small seeded axe now tucked into the earth. The thought is simple and true. Growth is patient and not prone to showiness. It will not rush a season. It will, at its own pace, repay those who have given it care. When the train lifts off again, it takes the station smoke with it and leaves behind the scent of steam and coal and a scattering of straw that clings to the boots of those left at the siding. People begin to fold themselves back into their tasks, but with a new ease, the knowledge that trade and transit exist again, that letters might continue, that seeds may be exchanged for stories. The ledger is closed for the moment, its page now filled with plans and a single, curious new line, Jonas, return. You notice, too, that someone has slipped a note into the jar of communal seed. It reads, for when you cannot, and is signed with initials that belong to no one in particular and everyone at once. Days lengthened with an unnoticed insistence. The first shoots appear like shy answers to the thought of spring. The communal plot promises a row of green that the children cheer for as though they have conjured it. The explorers, those who had kept watch through winter, begin to unclasp some of their gear and lend themselves to other labors. An antenna goes to hang over the schoolhouse to catch a station that teaches by wire. A surveyor sketches a plan for a safer crossing over the creek. In the small rooms and on the porches of repaired houses, conversations resume their usual, necessary mapping of life. Births near at hand, an aunt who needs more coal, the plan to get a roof mended before the next storm. Yet, within the comfort, there are fissures of fear. Traders from the lower valley, men in better coats with quicker talk, come in the wake of the train, and they carry offers that smell of opportunity and of risk. They speak of credit and of prices that will tempt more cautious souls. Some villagers take the offers under advisement. Others feel unease at the impression of a town becoming a stop on a line rather than a place that holds itself. There is a meeting called at the meeting house because the ledger needs amendment. How to balance the influx of goods with the need to keep their own rhythms. You watch the debate without urgency. It is the sort of discussion that must be had slowly and without dramatic arcs. Voices are raised and then softened. Margot, with the scarf still around her neck, raises a plain question. What will we become if we do everything that comes our way? Abram answers with another kind of plainness. We will be the sum of what we accept and what we refuse. This is not a resolution so much as a law of seasons. A community learns what it values when the first real choices arrive after a drought. As spring settles and the roads dry enough to carry a wagon, a stranger arrives who will, without theatrics, tilt the village into a new season. She comes on foot with a pack and a violin case, and she moves in such a manner that people notice only when she is among them. Her name is Lise. She is not a trader. She has come with a purpose that is small but steady, to teach the children music and to mend broken instruments with a patience perfected by transience. When she sets her case down in the schoolroom and opens it, the instruments inside gleam like small reconciliations. Her hands are quick and tattooed with little marks, maps of where a player has lived. The children gather around her the way seeds gather to sun. She tunes the violin with a knack that suggests she has tuned it in rooms that smelled of oil and sweat and supper. And then she plays a tune you have not heard before, a bit of a lilt, and then a cradle of long notes. It pulls at the town like a promise it has always known how to accept, that music can be a way of keeping time together. People stand in doorways and listen as if they have been given permission to be lightheaded a while. You go home that night and sit by the coal stove, the same one that has warmed so many nights. The radio hums in the corner like a soft companion. Outside, a barn owl calls once, and the fields are steady in the dark. You think of Jonas's letter, and of the jar of seeds, and of the ledger with its new lines. You think of the train and its smoke, and of Lisa's violin pulling the children like the first green in a ditch. The town, it seems, is learning a new vocabulary, how to receive what comes without losing what kept them through the cold. There are no grand pronouncements. There are only small acts, ink on paper, a shovel in the dirt, a letter read aloud. And these accumulate into the shape of what the village will become. In time, perhaps, there will be new patterns, shipments that will require accounting, visitors who will not know the ledger, offers that will demand a price the community must decide if it is willing to pay. For now, the field behind the meeting house holds a line of green, and the tide has turned from keeping to building. The explorers, those sentinels of stillness, watch, and their silence this season is not an absence but an invitation to speak in other ways, to sow, to teach, to make music. You find yourself returning to the lane each evening, to the stove's heat, to the hum of the radio, and you carry with you a small, steady conviction that this is the work of spring, not to erase winter's memory, but to collect it into something that will feed people when the next cold comes. Spring moves the town in small, certain measures. The children learn their scales slowly. Lise counts fingers and breath and nods like someone who measures more than sound. She repairs a cracked horn with beeswax and thread, and the patched seam holds its note like a promise kept. On Saturdays, she walks from door to door with a list and asks if there is an old fiddle, a broken reed, a drum with a split skin. People set such things on porches as if they were offerings. In the afternoons, the schoolroom fills. Mothers bring baked loaves, old men bring chairs, and the room becomes a place where hands that once held plows become gentle with bows. The meeting about the ledger does not vanish. It returns in conversations at the market stall and in the quiet between milking and supper. Traders still come by the inn after the train, their talk of credit and prices returning like a tide against the shore. Some of the ledger's new lines are crossed again. Ink, others remain. Abram sits with the book one evening and lays his palm on its open page as if he is trying to read a future in the strokes. Margot comes to stand beside him. They do not speak at once. When they do, it is not in the forceful sentences of the meeting house, but in the simpler speech of people who know the weight of common things. "We cannot be every road," she says, "nor should we be no road at all." He answers by setting the pen down and rising to fetch the mortar and pestle. Practical work is their language of agreement. Repairs follow a similar economy of love. The roof over the widow's cottage sags like an old back under frost. A band of young men and women gather one morning, some because there is payment, some because the widow once took their sick child in her arms, and they haul planks and thatch. Lise loosens her violin from its case and plays while others climb and nail. The music slows the ladder's creak. It binds splinters into rhythm. When the last slate is seated, someone laughs, and the sound is a small bell. The widow pours cider into tin cups, and the team drinks and eats, and returns home with hands that smell of tar and yeast. A concert forms in no grand planning. It is an afternoon in the field behind the meeting house, where the first green shoots have made a line against the earth. The children perform modest airs, tremulous at first, then steadier with each small success. The townsfolk sit on upturned crates. The traders who have lingered too long in the inn step outside and stand at the back, their coats damp with road dust. You watch from the lane, hands in your pockets, and feel something loosen in the chest that has been tight all winter. It is not that everything is solved. There are accounts still to be balanced and offers still to weigh. But for a handful of hours, the ledger is a quiet thing, and the field is full of sound. When Lise bows at the end and the children scatter into the sun, an old man in the crowd claps once, loudly enough that some turn and smile. Abram meets Margot's eyes, and they nod, and you understand, in a small and certain way, what the village will be. Not a place that keeps everything the same, nor one that abandons itself to every passing promise, but a place that chooses, day by day, the shape of its belonging. You go home as the light thins, the railroad's whistle far off and softened like a memory, and in the schoolroom a child wipes out a violin and swears she will practice until she can make the willow behind her house sing. You close the stove door and listen to the quiet that collects after a day's work, and the town, for now, breathes in and out. Holds.